I had a six-figure job, benefits, security, everything I'd worked for, and I was miserable because every day I was doing things that contradicted what I claimed to believe on Sunday. I'd pray before work, asking God to bless my day, and then spend 8 hours engaging in practices I knew weren't right.
And here's the question nobody wants to ask. How many of us are doing the exact same thing? How many of us have compartmentalized our faith so completely that we've convinced ourselves it doesn't apply to how we earn our living? Because if we're honest, really honest, most of us have made compromises we don't talk about.
Today, we're talking about the collision between faith and finance, and it's going to get uncomfortable.
Stay with us.
Welcome to Faith vs. Culture Studio. This is where beliefs are challenged, where culture meets conviction.
Welcome back to the Faith vs. Culture podcast studio. I'm Ruth, this is Peter, and today we're tackling one of the most avoided topics in modern Christianity. What do you do when your faith conflicts with how you make money?
And before you click away thinking this doesn't apply to you, let me ask, have you ever bent the truth to close a deal? Have you ever stayed silent about unethical practices at work because speaking up might cost you your job? Have you ever marketed a product you knew was overpriced or didn't deliver what it promised?
Have you ever worked for a company whose values fundamentally contradict your faith, but you've justified it because everyone's got to make a living? Have you ever pursued profit at the expense of people? Have you ever chosen financial security over integrity?
Yeah, this applies to more of us than we want to admit.
Because we live in a culture that's taught us to separate our spiritual life from our work life. Sunday Ruth and Monday Ruth are almost different people. And the church has largely been silent about this, giving us vague platitudes about being salt and light, without actually helping us navigate the real messy ethical dilemmas we face.
So today we're going deep. We're talking about what the Bible actually says about work and money. We're exploring the ethical gray areas. We're asking hard questions about capitalism, exploitation, and whether you can serve both God and your career ambitions.
And if you're someone who's wrestling with this, if you felt the conviction that something about your work isn't right, but you're terrified of what it would cost to change, this conversation is for you.
Hit subscribe because this is going to challenge you. Let's get into it.
Let's start here. Why have we separated faith from work so completely?
I think it's because if we didn't, the cognitive dissonance would be unbearable. Most of us are operating in economic systems and workplace cultures that fundamentally contradict biblical values. If we actually applied our faith to our work, we'd have to make choices that would cost us, financially, professionally, socially.
So we compartmentalize. We create these separate boxes in our minds where faith lives in one space and work lives in another. And we convince ourselves that God doesn't care about what happens Monday through Friday as long as we show up on Sunday.
Exactly. And the church has enabled this. We've created this artificial divide between sacred work, pastors, missionaries, charity workers, and secular work, everything else. So people think my job isn't ministry, therefore it's not really a faith issue.
But that's completely unbiblical. The Bible doesn't make that distinction. Whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Your work is worship. Or it's supposed to be, which means how you earn your money, how you treat colleagues, what you're willing to do for profit, all of that is a faith issue.
And when you realize that, it gets uncomfortable fast, because suddenly you can't just clock in, do whatever the job requires, and clock out with a clear conscience.
You faced this directly, didn't you? You want to share that story?
Yeah. I was working in corporate sales, good company, respected industry, and on paper everything was fine. But the culture was ruthless. It was all about hitting targets, maximizing profit, whatever it took. And whatever it took often meant manipulating clients, overselling, creating urgency through fear tactics. I was good at it, really good, and I justified it by saying, this is just how business works, everyone does it. But there were nights I'd come home and I couldn't pray. Because I knew that what I was doing didn't align with who I claimed to be.
What was the breaking point?
There was a client, an elderly couple. They didn't need what I was selling, and I knew it, but I sold it to them anyway, because I was behind on my targets. And after they signed, I felt sick, like I had just robbed them. And I realized I couldn't keep doing this and call myself a follower of Jesus.
What did you do?
I quit. Not immediately. I had bills, responsibilities, but I started making an exit plan. And it was terrifying because I was walking away from financial security with no clear alternative, but I couldn't live in that dissonance.
Let's talk about what Scripture actually teaches about work and money, because I think most Christians have a vague sense that we're supposed to be honest and work hard, but we haven't engaged with the deeper biblical ethic.
Right, so let's start with the obvious. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus says that directly. Not it's difficult to serve both. You cannot. They're incompatible masters.
Which doesn't mean money is inherently evil. It means that when the pursuit of money becomes your primary driver, it will inevitably conflict with following Jesus, because God's economy operates on completely different principles than the world's economy.
God's economy values people over profit. The world's economy does the opposite. God's economy says the worker deserves their wages, that you don't withhold payment, that you don't exploit the vulnerable. The world's economy says maximize profit by any means necessary.
Think about the year of Jubilee in Leviticus. Every 50 years, debts were canceled, slaves were freed, land was returned. It was a complete economic reset designed to prevent the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a few, whilst others remained perpetually oppressed.
And the prophets, Isaiah, Amos, Micah, they're constantly railing against economic injustice. Woe to those who add house to house and field to field. You trample on the poor and force them to give you grain. God cares deeply about economic systems and whether they're just.
James is even more direct. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. That's not symbolic, that's concrete. If you're withholding fair wages, if you're exploiting workers, God hears it.
And yet we've created a version of Christianity that's completely silent on these issues. We'll preach about personal morality, don't lie, don't steal, but we won't address systemic economic injustice or the ethics of how we participate in it.
Because addressing it would require change. It would require examining whether our lifestyles, our jobs, our investment portfolios are built on exploitation. And that's deeply uncomfortable. Okay, so some situations are clear-cut. If your job requires you to lie, cheat, or directly harm people, that's obviously a conflict. But what about the gray areas? What about situations that aren't obviously wrong, but still feel problematic?
This is where it gets complicated. Like, what if you work for a company that's generally ethical, but there's one aspect of their business that conflicts with your values? Do you leave? Do you try to change it from within?
Or what if you're in a role where you're not doing anything unethical yourself, but you're benefiting from systems that exploit others, like working for a company that uses sweatshop labor, or that contributes to environmental destruction, or that profits from addictive products?
Or here's another one. What if your job is morally neutral, but is consuming so much of your time and energy that you're neglecting your family, your community, your own spiritual health? Is that a conflict with your faith?
I think it is, because our faith isn't just about avoiding explicitly sinful actions. It's about stewardship of our time, our talents, our relationships. If your job is making it impossible for you to love God and love people well, that's a problem.
But here's where people push back. I have responsibilities. I have a mortgage, kids to feed, bills to pay. I can't just quit because I have some vague ethical concerns.
And that's valid. I'm not saying everyone should quit their job tomorrow, but I am saying we need to stop using financial responsibility as a blanket justification for ignoring our convictions.
Because here's the thing, God calls us to trust Him with our provision. That doesn't mean being irresponsible, but it does mean that when we're faced with a choice between integrity and financial security, we should choose integrity and trust that God will provide.
And I know that sounds idealistic, but we've seen it work. We've both walked away from financially lucrative situations because they conflicted with our faith. And we're still here. It was hard. It required sacrifice. But God was faithful.
That doesn't mean it'll look the same for everyone. Maybe for you, it's not quitting. It's having a conversation with your boss about the practices that concern you. Maybe it's looking for a different role within the company. Maybe it's starting an exit plan and working towards a transition over the next year.
But it starts with being honest, with admitting this isn't right and I need to address it, instead of numbing yourself to the conviction and justifying the status quo.
Let's get specific. Let's walk through some real scenarios that people face and talk about how to navigate them.
Okay, scenario 1. You work in marketing and your boss asks you to make claims about a product that you know are exaggerated or misleading. Not technically lies, but definitely deceptive. What do you do?
First, you push back. You say, I'm not comfortable with this phrasing because it's not accurate. Can we present it differently? You give your employer the opportunity to do the right thing.
And if they insist?
Then you have a decision to make. You can comply and compromise your integrity, or you can refuse and accept the consequences. And I know that's scary, but Proverbs says, better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice.
Scenario 2. You work for a company that pays you well and treats you well, but you discover they're using suppliers that exploit workers in developing countries. You benefit from this indirectly. What's your responsibility?
I think you have a responsibility to speak up. You can go to leadership and say, I'm concerned about our supply chain. Have we audited these suppliers? Are there alternatives that treat workers fairly? You advocate for change.
And if they refuse to change?
Then you have to weigh whether you can, in good conscience, continue benefiting from that system. For some people, the answer might be staying and continuing to advocate. For others, it might mean finding employment elsewhere.
There's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but there has to be some response. You can't just shrug and say, well, that's just how global capitalism works.
Scenario 3. You're offered a promotion that comes with a significant pay rise, but it would require you to work 60+ hours a week, including most evenings and weekends. You'd miss family dinners, church involvement, rest. Do you take it?
For me, that's a no, because money isn't worth sacrificing your relationships and your soul. Jesus asks, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? That applies to career advancement too.
But I think it's worth asking why you want the promotion. Is it because you genuinely feel called to that work? Or is it because you've bought into the cultural narrative that success equals climbing the ladder and earning more?
And if it's the latter, you need to examine what's driving you. Because if your identity is tied to your career success, you've made an idol out of your work. Let's be honest, choosing integrity over financial gain costs something. And I think we need to acknowledge that, because if we don't, we're being dishonest.
Absolutely. When I left that sales job, I took a massive pay cut. We had to downsize our lifestyle. There were things we couldn't afford anymore. And there were moments where I questioned whether I had made the right decision.
What got you through those moments?
Remembering that my identity isn't in my income, that my worth isn't determined by my job title or my salary, and honestly, experiencing God's provision in tangible ways. There were times money showed up exactly when we needed it, in ways we couldn't have orchestrated.
I think we also need to talk about the social cost, because when you make decisions based on faith rather than conventional wisdom, people think you're naive. They think you're irresponsible, and that judgment, especially from other Christians, can be really painful.
Yeah, I had people at church tell me I was being foolish, that God gave me that job and walking away was rejecting His blessing, and that messed with my head for a while.
But the alternative, staying in a situation that's eroding your soul, that costs something too. It costs your peace, your integrity, your witness, and eventually your faith.
Right. Because you can't live in constant contradiction and maintain spiritual health. Something will break. Either you'll harden your conscience to the point where you stop feeling the conviction, or you'll become so disillusioned that you walk away from faith entirely.
So yes, choosing integrity costs something, but compromise costs more. It just costs in ways that aren't as immediately visible.
So what does a biblical work ethic actually look like in practice? Because we've talked a lot about what's wrong, but what's the positive vision?
I think it starts with seeing your work as a vocation, a calling, rather than just a job. You're asking, how can I use my skills and resources to serve God and serve people?
And that can look different for everyone. For some people, it means working in explicitly ministry-related fields. For others, it means bringing kingdom values into secular workplaces.
But wherever you are, there are principles that apply. You treat people, colleagues, clients, employees with dignity. You refuse to participate in deception or exploitation. You advocate for justice within your sphere of influence.
You're honest in your dealings. You don't cut corners. You do quality work not because someone's watching, but because you're doing it unto the Lord.
You're generous. You don't hoard wealth or resources. You see what you have as something to be stewarded for the benefit of others, not just yourself.
And you maintain balance. You don't make an idol out of your work. You rest. You prioritize relationships. You recognize that your productivity doesn't determine your worth.
I also think we need to talk about systemic change, because individual ethics are important, but we also need to be advocating for economic systems that are more just.
Absolutely. If you're in a position of power or influence, you have a responsibility to use it well. That might mean pushing for fair wages, better working conditions, ethical sourcing, environmental responsibility.
And if you're not in a position of power, you can still advocate. You can support businesses that operate ethically. You can vote with your wallet. You can speak up about injustice when you see it.
Because faith isn't just about personal piety. It's about participating in God's work of making all things new. And that includes economic systems.
Before we wrap up, I think we need to talk about grace, because everything we've said today could easily lead to crushing guilt or paralysis.
Yeah, and that's not the point. The point isn't to make you feel terrible about every financial decision you've ever made. The point is to invite you into greater alignment between what you believe and how you live.
We've all made compromises. We've all participated in systems that aren't perfect. We've all prioritized money over integrity at some point. And if you're sitting there feeling condemned right now, that's not from God.
Conviction, yes. Condemnation, no. Conviction says, this isn't right and you can change. Condemnation says, you're a terrible person and there's no hope for you.
So if you're feeling convicted about your work situation, receive that as an invitation. God's not trying to crush you. He's trying to free you. He's inviting you into a way of living that's more aligned with who He is and who you're meant to be.
And recognize that change doesn't have to happen overnight. Maybe you can't quit tomorrow, but you can start praying about it. You can start looking for alternatives. You can start making small adjustments in how you operate.
And extend grace to others, too. Don't look at someone else's work situation and judge them. You don't know their full story. You don't know what constraints they're operating under.
Right. The goal isn't to create a new legalism where we're all policing each other's careers. The goal is to create a community where we can be honest about our struggles, where we can support each other in making hard decisions, and where we trust that God is at work in each person's journey.
So let me bring this together. Your faith and your finances aren't separate. How you make money, how you spend it, how you steward it, all of that is a discipleship issue.
When there's conflict between your faith and your work, you can't just ignore it. You have to engage it honestly, prayerfully, and be willing to make hard choices.
Those choices will cost you, but compromise costs more. And God is faithful to provide when you prioritize integrity over financial security.
The goal isn't perfection. It's faithfulness. It's asking, am I using my work to serve God and serve people? Or am I serving money and justifying it with spiritual language?
And whatever you discover in that examination, receive it with grace. God's not trying to trap you. He's trying to free you.
All right, we need to hear from you. Drop a comment and answer this. Have you ever faced a conflict between your faith and your work? How did you navigate it?
And if you're in that situation right now, tell us, what's the specific dilemma you're wrestling with? Because someone else watching has probably faced something similar, and their perspective might help you.
If this conversation challenged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to keep having these difficult, necessary conversations.
Your work matters to God, not just the spiritual stuff, but all of it. How you earn your money, how you treat people in the workplace, the decisions you make when nobody's watching, all of it is an act of worship or an act of rebellion.
So choose faithfulness, even when it costs you, because in the kingdom of God, integrity is worth more than any salary.
See you in the next episode.